So as most of you know, over these past few weeks, we've been spending some time looking at some various passages in the Bible that we can try and memorize just to help us, encourage us, strengthen us in times of ongoing struggle or discouragement or perhaps times of temptation that we face as Christians. And today I want to continue on by just finishing that series by focusing on one particular passage which speaks into a all too common experience for us as Christians. And it's been illustrated by the fact that today I've had an absolute shocker in recording these videos. Everything that could have gone wrong has pretty much gone wrong for me. It began by not being able to get my words out correctly, and perhaps something I'm going to struggle with continuing on in this video. But I got tongue-tied and not able to say what I wanted to say, and I got so frustrated that I then just kept starting again, and eventually got that to the point where actually I was in a rhythm and I was saying what I wanted to say and managed to get through one whole section, and then actually realised I forgot to press the record button, so started again, only for midway through the video a lorry to drive past when I was outside filming this, and removed all the sound. I then got half of the next one, and an Amazon delivery driver arrived to drop something off for us, and then was greeted by the flashing battery light at that point. Recharged it, managed to film the whole thing, to find out I got to the end of the video watching it that it was completely out of focus. That's been the experience of my day today when it comes to this, and out of God's provision, perhaps it's perfectly illustrated the point that I wanted to express today. Our experience as Christians is all too common that we have good days and bad days. And I don't just mean practically when it comes to this kind of video, but I mean that we get to the end of the day sometimes and everything's gone really well. And we feel encouraged and we feel buoyed and we feel quite happy and eager and accepted in terms of how we view God's view of ourselves, what we think God would think about us. And there are other days that everything goes wrong, and we suddenly get to the end of the day and perhaps lie in bed and we think, well, I'm a shocking Christian. I get to the end of the day and I feel like a bad person or a good person. And perhaps a better example would be to say I get to the end of the day and feel a good Christian, a faithful, fruitful Christian. And other days I feel like a terrible failure of a Christian. And that can affect what I think God thinks about me and how I find my assurance and my hope and my confidence that I am okay with him and reconciled to him. Whilst I might know in theory and theology and knowledge that I'm not acceptable to God by what I do, my own everyday experience can cause me to feel either more accepted or less accepted, more pleasing to God or less pleasing to God, more acceptable and worthy of his kingdom and less acceptable and worthy of his kingdom, depending on how that day has gone. And before we get to an example of this that a guy called Jerry Bridges gives us from his book, so I want to recount this passage I want us to memorise. It's a well-known passage from Ephesians chapter 2. Some of you may know it already really, really well, but it's worth just getting, not that we know it, but that we begin to understand and then apply it into these different days and experiences that we have. So here's the verse of Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8, and this is what it says. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves, it is a gift from God. It is not from works, so that no one can boast. Well-known verses, well-known words for if you've been involved in a church for a while. But it's a truth that we often battle with. And as I said, it's highlighted by a guy called Jerry Bridges in his book, Who Am I? My Identity in Christ, I think his book is called. And this is the section I want to read to you from his book. This is what he says. Our struggle against sin continually drives us to measure our acceptance before God on the basis of our performance. On a good day, we may get out of bed as soon as the alarm goes off and have a refreshing quiet time. Events of the day generally fall out the right way, and we encounter no significant sin issues. A bad day is just the opposite. We oversleep, skip our quiet time, muddle through a difficult day, and struggle all day long with sinful thoughts like resentment, envy, frustration, lust, etc. On which of those days would you be more expectant of God's blessing or answers to prayer? Your answer to that question reveals whether you are living by your works or by the gospel. And he goes on to say this. Your worst days are never so bad that you are beyond the reach of God. And your best days are never so good that you are beyond the need of God's grace. If we're going to grow in the realization of who we are in Christ, we must come to terms with the reality that we are not yet perfect. The presence and activity of sin is still alive and well within us. Bridges is really helpful there in that he reminds us and shows us and helps us to see a constant tension that we have. That as we get to the end of a day, if it's been really good, we perhaps feel more confident in bringing our prayers to God. Or perhaps we feel more confident in saying that we are secure for eternity, that we are assured that we are His and that we are born again believers. But perhaps the opposite is true on a bad day. Everything falls apart. We perhaps share our faith badly with someone at work or our neighbour, our friend, not answering their questions, in fact just creating several more for them, and leaving with a conversation with thinking, well, I'll never ever set foot in a church or have any interest in the gospel again. Our experience on a daily basis can affect our confidence, our assurance in our salvation, but also our confidence as we approach God in prayer and as we seek to serve Him. It can often be the difference between feeling able and equipped and ready and suitable to serve Him in the church, in youth ministry, in home groups, and whatever it might be. It may cause us to feel able and equipped to serve Him in different areas, or it might cause us to feel not worthy of doing that. Now, the truth be told, as we can see from this passage in Ephesians, none of us have done anything to make us worthy. Now, we know this in understanding and knowledge, and I'm sure many of you could echo this. And if I'd asked you at the beginning of this video, what is your confidence? What is your hope? What is it that makes you so sure you're a Christian? You would be able to give me that answer. Or it's because of grace, God's grace, that I'm accepted. So why then is it that when we have a day where everything goes wrong and we end up feeling like a really unfaithful, unfruitful Christian, we can feel so insecure in our salvation? Well, it's because of this experience that I have regularly, and I know many of you do because I've had this conversation with so many of you before, that I think this passage is so important for us not just to know and give the Sunday school nod to, but in a sense for us to remember and to use in these situations. So that when we get to the end of our day, like today, that our confidence is not in what we've done or what we haven't done, how well and successful things have gone or how badly and how much of a failure they've been, but instead that our hope and our confidence will rest secured in God's grace. And this is what Paul is talking about in this chapter. He wants the believers he's writing to rest assured in their confidence, in their hope, in their trust in God's grace. They'd be aware, yes, of the sinfulness of their past. They wouldn't get too puffed up, too arrogant. And we might not sit there and think that's a danger for us. We don't ever think that we're justified by our works. But I think what's more often the experience that we have is as we look at other people who aren't believers, and as we compare ourselves to them as believers, we say, well, how can they not be? I couldn't live my life without God. How can they? What foolish people to think this. And at times we can become puffed up in our enlightenedness, that we forget actually the reason that we know God, the reason that we accept Him, the reason that we have our trust in Him, the reason we have our faith in Him is because of His grace. And so surely we can't be puffed up and arrogant, but instead humble at what God has done for us, the great gift of salvation He's given to us. But also if we find ourselves dejected and overwhelmed with guilt, we need to remind ourselves that it is not through what we have done or yet to do, or going to do, that we are acceptable to Him. It's not our sin that discounts us, but instead what has happened is He has by grace reached into our life through His Son. That's what it says. It's what Paul says in Ephesians 2 earlier on. He says that God, out of His rich in mercy and out of His great love for us, has made us alive in Christ. And He's done this, we read later on in the passage, He's done this to show the immeasurable riches of His grace, shown to us through kindness in Christ. He has shown us great kindness and great mercy in the giving of His Son. And so as we go to bed tonight, or as we gather to God in prayer this evening, and every evening after this, we can know that we need not be affected or knocked down because of our failures, or more confident or more puffed up because of our successes. But instead, as we go to bed tonight, we go to bed giving thanks to God for the immeasurable riches of His grace displayed to us through kindness of sending His Son. Let us not be too puffed up or too cast down, but instead let us constantly be thankful and amazed and in awe of God's abundant grace, shown to us because of the richness of His mercy and the great love which He has for us. And rest assured in His great grace. May that be an encouragement and something to humble us, whether we have a good day or a bad day.